The great hall of the Virex royal palace shone with lights of many colors. Tall pillars of crystal lined the walls, and alien nobles dressed in shimmering robes stood watching. At the center of the hall stood a single human captain, Elias. He was surrounded by eyes filled with judgment and laughter. Before him stood 3 alien sisters, Sira, Vela, and Nomi, daughters of the mighty king of Virex. They were tall, graceful, and glowing with faint blue light from their skin. Each had silver eyes that shone like moons. But their beauty was spoiled by the cruel smiles on their faces. Sira, the eldest, stepped forward with a mocking grin. "So this is the mighty human everyone talks about? He looks so soft," she said, pretending to inspect his arms. Vela, the second sister, laughed loudly, covering her mouth. "Soft and tiny. Are all humans built like children?" she mocked. Nomi, the youngest, circled around Elias with curious but playful cruelty. "How do you even survive on Earth?" "A strong breeze might blow you away," she said, and the nobles around them laughed. Elias stood still. He did not answer. His posture was calm, his eyes steady, but inside, he knew exactly what was happening. He was being tested not by the court, but by fate itself. He had come here as a diplomat from Earth, sent to negotiate peace with the Virex Empire. The Empire had once considered invading Earth, but talks had begun instead. Yet, in the eyes of the Virex nobles, humans were still weak and laughable creatures. The king of Virex, a tall figure with deep blue skin and 2 shining crystal horns, sat on his grand throne, watching silently. His eyes were sharp, reading every move, every word. He saw his daughters laughing, and he saw the humans standing unbothered. "Human," the king finally spoke, his voice deep like rolling thunder. "They mock you. You say nothing. Why?" All eyes turned to Elias. He finally raised his head and replied in a calm, steady voice. "Because words mean little to those who refuse to listen. I don't waste my breath on laughter." The hall went quiet for a moment. The sisters looked at each other, surprised that the human dared speak with such boldness. "So you think yourself wise?" Sira sneered. "I think myself patient," Elias replied. "Mockery does not make me smaller, nor does it make you greater." There was a murmur among the courtiers. This human spoke with confidence, not arrogance. It was unusual. The king smiled slightly, amused by the human's poise. He remembered the reports. This man, Elias, had once defeated a Virex war squad with clever tactics, despite having no superior weapons. The king leaned forward. "Tell me, human... Do you fear my daughters?" Elias smiled faintly. "I do not. Fear those who only know how to laugh." The sisters' smiles faded a little. They had expected anger or begging, not quiet strength. The king watched with keen interest. Something about this human stirred his old warrior's heart. "Perhaps," the king said slowly, "we should test this human more closely." At his words, the nobles grew silent. The king stood up, his voice booming across the hall. "Let it be declared. My 3 daughters, Sira, Vela, and Nomi, shall marry this human." Gasps filled the air. The sisters shouted in protest. "Father, no, that is madness," Sira yelled. "You cannot force this," Vela cried. "I won't marry a weakling," Nomi shouted, but the king raised his hand, silencing them all. "Enough. He is braver than the fools who laugh at him. If you mock him so easily, then prove your strength." By knowing him, by living with him, Elias was stunned. He had not come here expecting marriage, let alone to 3 alien princesses who hated him. But the king's eyes met his, and Elias understood this was no accident. The king was watching. For something more. The sisters stormed off, furious and humiliated. The nobles whispered among themselves. But Elias stood there, quiet, thoughtful. Why did the king do this? He wondered. As the hall emptied, the king's advisor leaned to him. "Your Majesty, was this wise? I have seen the humans." "Eyes," the king said. "There is more strength in them than any of my daughters can see. Let them learn this truth for themselves." Meanwhile, Elias was taken to his new quarters. Alone, he sat by the window, looking at the alien stars above. He did not know what was coming, but he was sure of one thing: this was just the beginning. "Let them laugh," he whispered to himself. "I will show them soon enough." The stars twinkled back silently, as if waiting for the next chapter to unfold. Captain Elias woke early in the royal guest quarters. The room was huge, with walls made of crystal that glowed faintly in the dark, but Elias felt no comfort here. He had come to this world to make peace, and now he was trapped in a royal drama he didn't ask for: the news of his forced marriage to the 3 alien princesses had spread across the palace like wildfire. Servants whispered when he passed. Guards chuckled behind his back. Even in silence, he felt the weight of their stares, but Elias didn't show his discomfort. He walked the palace calmly, observing everything around him: the tall spires, the glowing gardens, the strange air that smelled of spices. He watched the guards train, studied the layout of the palace walls, and noted hidden passageways. Unknown to many, Elias was a soldier first, diplomat second. On Earth, he had survived wars, ambushes, and betrayals. He believed that to survive, one must always be prepared, even in peace. Suddenly, 2 royal guards appeared. "The king wants to see you," one said, without any emotion. Elias nodded and followed them. They led him through winding halls until they reached a private royal garden, hidden inside the palace. The air was sweet with the scent of glowing flowers, and in the center stood the king, holding a large, curved blade. "Human," the king called. "Do you know how to handle a blade?" Elias raised an eyebrow. "I know enough to survive." The king chuckled, tossing a wooden practice sword toward him. "Good. Let's see if Earth survival is enough against me." Without warning, the king charged. His movements were fast for someone so large, but Elias didn't panic. He stepped aside, letting the heavy blade miss him by inches. He countered, striking the king's side with the wooden sword, but the king barely flinched. The 2 circled each other. The king attacked again, faster this time. Elias dodged, blocked, and moved. He was smaller, weaker in strength, but quicker. Every time the king swung with power, Elias responded with speed. Minutes passed. Neither had landed a serious blow, but sweat beaded the king's brow. He laughed deeply. "You are clever. You know you can't win by force, so you use your size against me. A true warrior knows his limits." Elias stayed focused, breathing steady. "And a true leader knows when not to fight." The king smiled widely and dropped his blade. "Enough. You've proven yourself human." Elias lowered his sword, confused. "Proven what?" "That you are not like the fools who mock you," the king said. "I knew from the start that my daughters would hate you, but I wanted to see if you'd break." "Why test me?" Elias asked, wiping his brow. The king's eyes grew serious. "Because this empire is fragile, though no one sees it. My daughters Sira, Vela, and Nomi think strength is in power, in muscles and pride. But I've ruled long enough to know strength is in patience, wisdom, and courage." The king stepped closer. "I ordered the marriage because I wanted my daughters to see what I see in you. A human with the mind of a warrior and the heart of a leader. Maybe, just maybe, you can teach them what I failed to teach." Elias understood now. This wasn't just a punishment for the princess's mockery. It was a challenge. A test to see if Elias could change the hearts of the royal family. "And if I fail?" Elias asked quietly. The king smiled, but there was sadness in his eyes. "Then my daughters will never understand the true meaning of strength. And when the Drakthi return, Virex will fall." That name caught Elias' attention. "The Drakthi? Who are they?" But the king shook his head. That's a story for another day. For now, you must survive your wives." The king laughed, clapping Elias on the back before walking away, leaving Elias alone in the garden. Later that evening, back in his quarters, Elias stared at the alien stars once again. The weight of his mission, his strange marriage, and now the mention of a hidden enemy, everything was more complicated than he thought. "Marry them, teach them, and survive them," Elias whispered to himself with a small smile. "Easy, right?" Outside his door, unseen by him, Nomi, the youngest sister, stood listening. She frowned, curious why the human was not angry or afraid. She had come to mock him again, but now she wasn't so sure. She quietly walked away, not mocking but wondering. The morning sun on planet Virex shone through walls of crystal, casting colored light across the palace. The entire court was summoned again to the grand hall. The air was buzzing with rumors. Word had spread that the king had issued a secret command about the human. Captain Elias. Elias stood quietly in the center of the hall again, surrounded by nobles whispering and sneering. His eyes stayed calm, but inside his mind was sharp. He sensed something big was about to happen. Then the king entered. His tall form, blue skin, and crystal horns made every head bow low. The three princesses Sira, Vila, and Nomi stood near the throne, their faces still angry from the last day's humiliation. They had avoided Elias since the king's odd sword test in the garden. The king raised his hand and the hall fell silent. His deep voice echoed, "Hear my words. By my will as king and ruler of Virex, I declare this decree." Everyone leaned closer. The king's gaze locked on his daughters. "Sira, Vela, Nomi, you shall marry the human Captain Elias of Earth." The entire hall gasped. Nobles stared in shock. Sira's eyes went wide, her face turning pale with rage. Vila looked at the king, her mouth open but no words coming out. Nomi's fists clenched tight, her silver eyes burning. "You cannot be serious," Sira shouted. "A human? He is beneath us. This is a joke," Vila snapped. "We are of royal blood. Why disgrace us like this?" Nomi cried. The king slammed his staff on the ground, the sound sharp and final. "Silence. You mock him so easily. Now prove your worth by living with him." The court was still. The sisters stared at their father in disbelief, but his expression was unshaken. "You said he was weak. You laughed at him," the king continued. "If he is so weak, then surely three of you can handle one human husband without trouble." The words were clear. This was both a punishment and a lesson. But for the sisters, it was a public humiliation. Elias raised his voice, steady and respectful. "Your Majesty, I did not come to your world for this. I came for peace, not marriage." The king turned his eyes to Elias, his face softening. "And peace you shall have, Captain. But peace is not built by talks alone. It is built on understanding. My daughters know nothing of Earth, and you know little of Virex. This union will teach both sides what words cannot." Elias understood the deeper meaning. This wasn't just a marriage, it was a bridge between two worlds, two cultures. But still, the idea of marrying three alien women who despised him wasn't easy to accept. "Will you refuse me, human?" the king asked. Elias thought for a moment. Then he straightened his back. "I will not refuse, Your Majesty. But know this respect is earned, not given by law." The king smiled faintly. The court murmured. Some nobles smirked. Others looked at Elias with new eyes. "Wise words," the king nodded. "Let it be written. The wedding shall be in 3 days. My daughters will prepare." The sisters stormed off the platform, furious. Their pride burned hotter than fire. Sira muttered under her breath, "We will make his life miserable." Vela whispered, "Let him regret stepping on Virex soil." Nomi, however, said nothing. She looked back once at Elias, her eyes sharp but thoughtful. Something about his calmness puzzled her. After the court dismissed, Elias was escorted to his chambers again. Along the way, palace servants giggled behind walls, and alien nobles chuckled openly. One guard asked him quietly, "Are all humans this brave or just foolish?" Elias smiled slightly. "On Earth, we call it both." In his chamber, Elias stared out the window at the two moons of Virex. His mind was racing. 3 days to prepare for marriage with 3 strangers who hate me. What's the king really planning? Suddenly, a small note was slipped under his door. Elias picked it up. It read, "Be careful, human. Not all want you here alive." No name, no signature. Elias stared at the note, his mind more alert than ever. Not just mockery, someone wanted him dead. And here I thought marriage would be my biggest problem, Elias muttered. Outside his door, shadows moved in the palace halls. Someone was watching, and not just the curious nobles. The clock was ticking. And Elias knew his survival, his mission, and now his life depended on what he did in the next 3 days. The sun had set on planet Virex, casting a silver glow over the palace. 2 moons rose high, bathing the towers in cold light. Inside the royal quarters, the air was colder still, especially for the human. Captain Elias, who now stood outside the private chambers, meant for him and his 3 alien brides. The grand chamber was prepared as tradition demanded. Rich velvet cushions, delicate lights, and even a bed large enough for 4. But there was one problem. The 3 sisters had no intention of sharing anything with him. Sira, the eldest, stood with her arms crossed, her silver eyes full of disgust. "This is an insult to us. We are princesses, not caretakers of some earth creature." Vila tossed her silky robe onto a chair, laughing cruelly. "He should sleep on the floor. Or better yet, outside the palace with the servants." Nomi, the youngest, said nothing. She sat near the window, staring at the twin moons. Her face was calm, but her mind was restless. Something about this human disturbed her, not in weakness, but in mystery. Elias remained quiet. He stood with his small bag, eyes watching but lips sealed. He expected this treatment. What else could he expect from 3 women forced to marry a man they mocked just days ago? Sira turned sharply to Elias. "You will sleep in the outer chamber. Speak to us only when necessary." Elias didn't argue. He simply nodded and carried his belongings to the smaller room next door. It was less grand, but still comfortable by human standards. He placed his things down and sat by the window, looking at the alien sky. But Elias was not resting. His mind worked like a machine. The note he received earlier, "Be careful, human. Not all want you here alive," haunted him. He was already hated by his wives, mocked by the court, and now someone was plotting his death. He pulled out a small notebook from his bag, a habit from his soldier days. He started sketching a map of the palace from memory, the halls, the gardens, the throne room, the hidden paths he noticed during his walks. "In war or marriage, knowing the terrain is survival," he whispered to himself. Meanwhile, back in the main chamber, the sisters continued their cruel chatter. "Let's make this marriage unbearable for him," Sira hissed. "Yes," Vila agreed. "If he suffers enough, perhaps Father will annul this foolish union." But Nomi stayed silent. She glanced once at the door that separated them from Elias. She remembered seeing him spar with the king in the garden. The human was no weakling, despite his size. His eyes held patience, not submission. "He is not what he seems," Nomi whispered to herself. Night deepened. Elias remained awake, sitting near the window with his notebook. The palace was quiet, but then he heard a faint sound. A soft shuffle outside his door. His eyes sharpened. Quietly, he stood and pressed his ear to the door. The footsteps stopped, but he heard a faint click like a blade being drawn. Without hesitation, Elias blew out his lamp and moved into the shadows of the room. Moments later, the door creaked open. A dark figure slipped inside, holding a curved dagger that gleamed. In the moonlight, the assassin crept closer to the bed, expecting Elias to be asleep there. But the bed was empty. Before the assassin could react, Elias struck from the side, knocking the dagger away and pinning the intruder to the wall. His hand gripped the attacker's throat just tight enough to keep them from shouting. "Who sent?" "You?" Elias whispered coldly. The assassin struggled but remained silent. Then, with a sharp movement, they bit down on something in their mouth, a hidden poison capsule. Within seconds, the assassin's body went limp and fell to the floor, dead. Elias stood over the body, his mind racing. He checked the assassin's clothes. There were no royal marks, but a small tattoo on the wrist caught his eye. A black serpent coiled around a dagger. "Who are the serpent daggers?" Elias muttered. Just then, a sound came from the other side of the door. Elias grabbed his dagger, ready to fight again, but it was Nomi who stepped in. She looked between Elias and the dead assassin, her eyes wide. "What happened here?" she demanded. Elias didn't lie. "Someone tried to kill me, and I doubt it was just because I'm an unwanted husband." Nomi stared at the corpse, then at Elias. She was silent for a moment before she whispered, "The mark. That's a symbol of the Drakthi spies. They're watching the palace." "You know of them?" Elias asked. "Everyone knows, but no one admits it," Nomi said softly. "If the Drakthi are here, you are not safe. Neither are we." The tension between them shifted. For the first time, Nomi saw Elias not as a weak human, but as a survivor, a warrior. "Why did you come here, human?" she asked quietly. Elias looked at her, his voice steady. "I came for peace, but I'll settle for survival." And with that, the cold disdain of the first night began to crack, ever so slightly, replaced by the thin thread of curiosity and respect. The next morning, the palace awoke to whispers. A dead body had been found outside the human's chamber, an assassin. The servant spoke in hushed tones, afraid to even say the word Drakthi. But inside his small room, Captain Elias was already working. He sat at a table with scraps of paper, strings, and charcoal marks spread across his notebook. His mind mapped every corridor, every balcony, and every narrow servant tunnel in the palace. He knew the Drakthi spies were already inside these walls. If they sent an assassin once, they would strike again, only next time, not just for him. They would come for the royal family. Elias wasn't just a diplomat. Before that, he was a strategist trained to predict danger, to think 3 moves ahead. And now he was sure, this palace will be attacked. And no one is ready. But who would listen to him? The sisters hated him, the nobles mocked him, and the king remained silent about the Drakthi threat. Just then, a soft knock came at his door. It opened slightly, and Nomi, the youngest sister, peeked inside. She looked unsure but curious. "What are you doing?" she asked. Elias didn't look up. "Planning how to keep this palace standing," he said. "Why, they all hate you," Nomi said honestly. "Even I did. Until last night." Elias looked at her, his eyes serious. "I'm not here to be loved. I'm here to survive. And if I fail, everyone here dies too." Nomi stepped inside fully. She watched him work, lines drawn between rooms, guard posts marked with X's, and secret passages circled. She saw the precision, the thought behind each mark. "You really believe the Drakthi will attack?" she whispered. "I know they will," Elias replied. "But if I had help, I could prepare the defenses." Nomi hesitated. Then she nodded. "Tell me what to do." For the first time, Elias smiled a little. "Good, but first we need your sisters on our side." By nightfall, Elias stood before Sira and Vela in their private lounge. Both looked unimpressed as Nomi stood beside him. "What is this, Nomi?" Sira asked coldly. "I brought him here because he knows things we don't," Nomi answered. Vela scoffed. "He's a human. What could he know that we don't?" Elias didn't waste time. He pulled out his notebook, showing them the palace map. "This palace has gaps in security. There are blind spots where guards can't see. Hidden doors that lead straight to the royal chambers. And those blind spots are where the Drachthi will come from. The sisters exchanged glances, their pride fighting their curiosity. And how would you know this? Sira challenged. Because I've led soldiers against worse, Elias said simply. Mock me all you want, but if I'm wrong you can keep laughing, if I'm right. We're all dead if you don't act. Now Sira's jaw tightened. Vela frowned, but deep down, they knew he made sense. Nomi stepped forward. I saw the assassin myself. He was Drachthi trained. If he says there's danger, I believe him. Finally Sira sighed. Fine, what do you need us to do? Elias's eyes shone with quiet determination. I need access to the guard captain, and I need your authority to move soldiers without raising alarm. If we scare the court, the Drachthi will strike sooner. And in return, Vela asked. In return, I keep you alive, Elias replied. The sisters, for the first time, nodded in agreement. The mockery was fading, replaced by reluctant respect. Over the next 2 days, the palace changed silently. Guards were repositioned. Traps were set in secret passages, wires, weighted nets, and alarms hidden under rugs. Servants were instructed quietly to stay away from certain corridors. Elias worked day and night, teaching the guards new techniques, earth tactics, quick signals, silent formations. The Virex soldiers at first laughed at the humans' orders, but soon they saw his brilliance. He's like a shadow general, one guard whispered to another. By the third night, the palace was tense. The air was too still, too quiet. Then, just before midnight, it happened. Shadows moved. Figures dressed in black scales crept through the palace walls. The Drachthi had arrived. Silent, deadly, and fast, but they didn't expect traps. The first wave of assassins triggered. A wire bells rang sharply. Guards flooded the halls, meeting them head-on. Elias stood with the captain of the guards, directing them like chess pieces. Block the east tunnel. Send archers to the upper balconies. Cut off their escape. Sira, Vila, and Nomi watched in shock, not only at the invasion, but at the human who commanded like a king of war. Nomi whispered to her sisters, "He saved us. If he hadn't prepared, we'd be dead." Vila nodded slowly. Perhaps we judged too soon. The battle was fierce, but the Drachthi were caught off guard by the defenses. One by one, they fell. When the last of them was slain, the palace stood bruised. But standing, Elias stood on the steps of the grand hall, blood on his shirt, but eyes sharp. The king arrived, hearing the news. He looked at Elias, then at his daughters. "Tell me, who saved you?" The king asked. Sira stepped forward and with a steady voice said, "The human, our husband." That night, no one mocked Elias. The man they laughed at had saved the empire. And deep in the eyes of his wives, something had changed. No longer mockery, but a spark of respect. And curiosity. The palace had returned to silence, but it was not the same silence as before. There was tension in the air, but not fear. Instead, it was the heavy weight of realization. For the first time in Virex history, a human had saved the royal bloodline. Captain Elias walked the palace halls with quiet steps, his clothes still stained from the battle. Servants who once whispered insults now bowed their heads in respect when he passed. Soldiers who once chuckled at his small frame now stood straighter when they saw him. But Elias paid them no mind. He wasn't here for their praise. His mission was to survive, and he had done just that. Yet behind him, unknown to his own eyes, 3 sets of footsteps followed. In the grand library, Elias sat at a long stone table, sketching in his notebook again. He was already planning. If one Drachthi cell entered the palace, others will follow. This wasn't the end. It was only a test. Suddenly, a shadow fell across his book. He looked up. It was Sira, the eldest sister. She stood with her hands behind her back, her expression unreadable. "You think more like a soldier than a husband," she said flatly. Elias closed his book. "That's because I've always been a soldier first." Before he could say more, Vila appeared on his other side. She was usually the loudest, the most cruel, but now her tone was softer. "I watched you command our guards. They listened to you like you were born to lead." "They listened because their lives were at stake," Elias replied. "Fear teaches obedience, but respect's harder to earn." Vila frowned slightly. She wasn't used to hearing such words. Then came Nomi, the quiet one, her eyes thoughtful as always. She stood across the table, watching Elias closely. "We misjudged you," Nomi admitted softly. "All three of us." Elias raised an eyebrow, half smiling. "That's the first honest thing I've heard since the wedding decree." Sira stepped forward, her pride clearly bruised, but her curiosity burning. "Tell me, human ... what makes your kind so hard to break? We mocked you, tried to shame you, but you stood stronger each time." Elias leaned back in his chair, looking up at the grand crystal ceiling. "Because where I come from, being mocked is common, but staying small because of mockery? That's a choice. I chose to stand." There was a quiet pause. The sisters, for the first time, didn't have a clever insult or sharp word to throw. Instead, they stared at the human with new eyes. Vila folded her arms. "You see things ... differently. Like you're always seeing the next problem before it comes." "That's survival," Elias said. "When you grow up on a planet where nature itself tries to kill you, you either think ahead or you die." Nomi walked slowly around the table, her eyes never leaving Elias. "You are not strong like us, not in body. But you're clever ... dangerous even. Like a predator hiding under soft skin." Elias chuckled. "Humans are not born dangerous. We become dangerous when pushed." Sira sat down across from him. "Perhaps that is why Father chose you. To teach us that strength isn't just power. It's single quotes s ... patience, endurance." For the first time, the walls between them started to crack. The three princesses, once proud, cold, and cruel, now sat with their human husband, not as enemies, but as students. They began asking questions about Earth, about war, about strategy. Elias answered them with patience. He spoke of Earth's endless challenges, wild beasts, harsh climates, wars fought not just with weapons, but with minds. Hours passed without notice. The moons shifted in the sky, but inside the library, time seemed to slow. Vila, who had once called him fragile, now looked at his hand scarred, calloused. "You've seen too much war for one lifetime," she whispered. Elias nodded. "Enough to know I don't want it anymore." Nomi sat next to him now, her voice softer. "Then why risk your life for a people who hate you here?" Elias looked at each of them, his gaze firm. "Because I don't care if you hate me. I care that the innocent live. Even in a strange land like this, life is life." The sisters were silent. For the first time, they didn't see a weak human. They saw a protector, a man with a sharp mind, a weary heart, and a soul stronger than any blade. Sira stood up slowly. "Perhaps Father was right to force this union. Perhaps we needed you more than you needed us." Without another word, the sisters left the library, each lost in thought. Elias remained, staring at his notebook, his mind always calculating. Yet deep down, he felt something shifting. The sharp hatred of his brides was softening, not yet love, but something else. Fascination. And in thaw. Days passed in the Virex palace, but things had changed. The alien courtiers who once laughed at the human, Captain Elias, now watched him with careful eyes. He was no longer the weak Earthman in their view. He was the man who had stopped an invasion. Yet Elias stayed humble. He trained the palace guards every morning, walked the halls at night mapping weak spots, and often sat quietly in the library, sketching plans alone. But what changed most was the company he kept. Where he once walked alone, now the three sisters followed not out of duty, but by choice. Sira, the eldest, discussed strategies with him, often challenging his ideas just to understand him better. Vila, the sharp-tongued middle sister, debated with him about Earth's strange ways, her curiosity turning into admiration. And Nomi, the quietest, watched him most of all, her eyes always thoughtful. Her steps always near Dot. It was a slow shift, but even the king noticed. One evening, he called Elias and his daughters to the throne room. The room was quieter than before. No sneers, no mocking. Just respect. The king stood tall, his voice steady. When I forced this marriage, I did so because I saw a spark in the human. Now I see more than a spark, I see a flame. He looked at his daughters. Do you still think him weak? Sira stepped forward first. She looked at Elias, then the court. I thought he was soft. I was wrong. His strength is not in his arms, but in his mind, and we need that strength. Vila nodded and spoke next. He has no royal blood, but he commands with a leader's heart. That deserves more than mockery. It deserves a ... respect. Finally, Nomi's voice broke the silence, soft but clear. He taught me that survival is not just about strength. It's about thinking ahead, about protecting even those who hate you. The king smiled. Then it is time. Time to seal this bond, not as a forced marriage, but as a true one. The court stirred. Elias looked between the sisters, surprised. And if I refuse? He asked, half-smiling. The king chuckled. Then you are free to go. But I suspect you'll find that leaving is harder than you think. Sira stepped closer. You have proven yourself to the kingdom, Elias. But now, prove yourself to us, not as a warrior but as our husband. Walk with us. Stand with us. Be ours not by the king's command, but by your own will. The court waited. Elias looked at each of them, the proud Sira, the sharp Vila, the curious Nomi. He had come to this world as a stranger, mocked and belittled. But now, they stood before him, not as enemies, but as equals. Elias stepped forward. Then I choose to stay. Not because I must, but because together, we're stronger. Together, we survive. The king raised his staff high. Then let it be known, by Varek's tradition, the bond is sealed. Captain Elias of Earth is the husband of Sira, Vela, and Nomi, 3 daughters of the royal blood. The court erupted not in laughter, but in applause. The human was now royal by bond. The man they mocked was now family. That night, the palace was alive with celebration. Lights hung from crystal towers, music filled the air, and banners of both Earth and Varek symbols waved side by side. Elias stood on the balcony, watching the twin moons. His wives stood beside him. Sira raised her cup. To our strange, stubborn, clever human, Vila grinned. To the only man who could survive us, Nomi smiled gently. To the one who changed our hearts, Elias smiled, lifting his cup. 2. Survival, respect, and maybe one day love. The night sky sparkled with stars, and beneath them, the royal bond was truly sealed, not by force, but by choice. And across the galaxy, stories would spread of the human who walked among the stars, turned mockery into respect, and tamed not just a kingdom, but the hearts of 3 alien sisters.